Ready? So good morning, everyone. My name is Jumoke Akintelo, and I'm the hearing officer for today. And Cherise Waiters is the clerk. And so as Cherise had mentioned, this hearing is being recorded, and it is a hearing for tree removals. And we have 6 items on the agenda. Order number 204-776-313-33 Burnett Avenue to consider removal of 6 significant trees on private property with replacement of 3 to 6 street trees. The second order number is 204-777-151 Potrero Avenue, and this is to consider removal of 2 street trees with replacement. Third item is order number 204-778-99 Woodward Street / 344 14th Street to consider removal of 7 significant trees on private property with replacement of 10 to 15 street trees. Fourth item is order number 204-779, and the address is 966 Delores Street. This is to consider removal of 1 street tree with replacement. Order number 204-780 at 1909 Burdrick Street to consider the removal of 1 significant tree on private property without replacement. The last item, which is the 6th item on the agenda, is order number 204-781. The address is 1666 Wallace Avenue to consider removal of 1 significant tree on private property with replacement. So my job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing items that I had just mentioned to you, and it's to listen to your testimony and help our Director of Public Works make a decision. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing along with my recommendations to the director. The director will then make the final determination. Once the director's determination is made, the department will notify you of them. As you already have your information in the chat box, as Cherise had said. So the hearing will proceed as follows. I'll ask Public Works staff to speak first and present the case. Then I will ask each appellant to speak, and each appellant has 2 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers, and when you hear the first bell, Cherise, are we still using the bell on this one? And that would be the
I will
signal.
notify them when they have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. So comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or to the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the slotted time, you could submit your written testimony to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask the question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. So now, can we begin the hearing? Susan?
Yes.
Thank you. Susan, go ahead with your presentation on the first agenda item.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All right. My name is Susan Nawberry. I'm the staff representative for the Bureau of Urban Forestry today. And our first case is order number 204-776, 313 through 333 Burnett Avenue. And it's to consider the removal of 6 significant trees on private property. And it's with replacement of 3 to 6 street trees, and I'll explain that in a little more detail later. And we approved the removal at staff level, and the public has protested. So this is Burnett Avenue, and the trees on the left are the ones that are going to be removed, and it's a combination of cypress trees, some New Zealand Christmas trees, and some pittosporum. So it's 6 total trees. And so they're all significant trees. They're on private property. So a significant tree is a tree that's within 10 feet of the right of way, but it's not in the right of way. And it's at least 12 inches in diameter, 15 foot in canopy spread, or 20 feet tall. So it has to meet one of these three criteria, not all. And because these are all significant trees and they cannot be replaced as significant trees, the in-lieu fee will be assessed per tree or the assessed value, whichever is higher. And that's per our code. So our code requires that we assess an in-lieu fee for the loss of a tree. And then the street tree requirement will be assessed separately. And so all these trees are in the footprints of these buildings. So basically, it's a hillside. It's like open space, except it's private property. And most of these are volunteer, or all of them are volunteer trees, and they all are in the footprint of the construction. And so, in order to build the building, these trees have to be removed. And I don't think it's feasible to work around them because of the hillside, the slope, the distance from the curb, and the placement of the trees makes it so that you can't really protect their critical root zone and build the lot without significantly shrinking the lot to possibly a size that somebody could not really live in. So these are the 6 trees, and from left to right, it's a cypress, and that's a pittosporum, another cypress, a cypress, and I believe the far left is a pittosporum, and these are all volunteer trees. And again, they can't be replaced as significant trees in property because that's the footprint of construction. And so we're assessing the in-lieu fee or the appraised value, whichever is higher per tree. And so there's the pittosporum. It has a shrubby structure, but our code, the way it defines a tree, this falls under the category of a tree. And this Monterey cypress, it's also within the footprint of the construction. And so these 2 that are within the footprint of the construction. And then again, with this New Zealand Christmas tree shrub, it just meets the qualification of a tree. So we assessed it as a tree, and then the in-lieu fee will be paid for that as well. So all these basically meet the significant tree criteria, and this is another Monterey cypress. It meets the height criteria. This Monterey cypress will be protected during construction. It's not proposed for removal. It's not within the footprint of construction. And so this will be this is a conceptual drawing, and it's estimated that the development will be able to plant 6 street trees. And again, we don't consider the street trees a replacement for the significant trees because the development of a building requires that trees be added anyway. So that is why we're assessing the in-lieu fee or appraised value for the loss of the significant trees. And then further down the line, when the development gets going and the plans are put into place, we'll know if they can plant 6 trees or if the utilities don't allow possibly 3 trees, but our code requires that either an in-lieu fee or a tree be planted. So an in-lieu fee is what it costs for us to plant a tree elsewhere and water it for 3 years. So if they have utilities that don't allow the placement of a tree, we'll instead assess an in-lieu fee. And again, this is all separate from the removal of the significant trees and then the values that will be assessed because street tree planting and in-lieu fee requirements, they're required whether or not there's a removal involved. So that concludes 313 Burnett. And so to be consistent with how we handle these cases and the fact that the building is in the trees are in the footprint of the building construction in private property, we approve the removal of these significant trees. We assess the in-lieu fees and or appraised value, whichever is higher. And then we'll be assessing the street tree requirement as the building permits become released and as the site plans are finalized.
Thank you. So do we have any public comments on this? If there are no, okay, so we have Josh, his hand is raised. Go ahead, Josh. 2 minutes.
I believe we do have someone here representing the owner as well. Is that
Okay.
correct?
So can we have the owner speak then? And then we'll take public comments. So we have two people. We have Josh and L. Wise.
Go ahead and speak.
Hi, I'm Earl Weiss. I'm the applicant.
Okay, go ahead. We can hear you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
we can hear you. Go ahead, L. We can hear you. Mr. Wise, you're muted.
Hi, I'm Earl Weiss. Can everybody hear me? I'm not. Okay,
Yes, we can
I got
hear
a
you.
nod there.
We can hear you.
So anyway, I'm the applicant. The trees are more than just on the public property. They're on the sidewalk. There is no sidewalk on the property currently. We need to add a sidewalk. As everybody knows, sidewalks are public access. They have to be fully accessible. And even if for some reason DPW said this tree miraculously works in the sidewalk, it's the wrong species. They're too big for a street tree. So yes, some of them are within the construction zone, but it's mainly the sidewalk, the construction of a new sidewalk. Yes, we plan on installing 6 street trees, but we also plan on adding more landscape trees to the back as part of the overall construction.
Okay.
And that's all the comments I have right now, unless somebody has a direct question for me.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. We have Josh, his hand is up. Thank you for that information. Good to know.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. Just a personal note that I really look forward to the day when we have hearings to take down luxury condos or garages to plant trees. Also, I didn't see that one tree that was stated for preservation in the design rendering, and it sounded like based on that last comment, it isn't actually staying. So I'd like some clarification on that. Also point out, this is the 3rd large removal proposed in a small radius for development. And I'd be curious to know if the Bureau keeps any sort of map, not a list, but a map of where all these trees continue to come out, because it may offer us a larger perspective on how one permit at a time we are depleting our canopy. There was mention of planting and an acknowledgement that that is a legal requirement, literally the worst you can do and still comply with the law. We're in an historic drought and historic wildfire season and constantly reaching more historic, terrible climate milestones. But it seems like when it comes to preserving trees, which are our allies, in San Francisco, they lose. And then I would also note that in this specific neighborhood, which includes UCSF and Mount Sutro, both areas which are undergoing profound urban canopy reductions, cumulative deforesting means the loss of root systems that are stabilizing these hillsides and canopies that provide shelter for our ecology. So again, I would just ask that the Bureau keep some sort of map that shows where all of these are coming down, not just a spreadsheet with a list of addresses, because that's not offering us the information we really need when we consider the forest as a forest on the whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments on this agenda item? In the absence of public comments, we're going to move to the next one, which is order number 204777, 151 Potrero Avenue. Susan?
So this is to consider the removal of 2 street trees with replacement, and then staff approves the removals and the public has protested. So this is, again, another development. And basically, they're going to renovate the entire building. And these two trees at the corner, their critical root zones and crowns conflict with the construction. So right now, the crown of the far right tree grows over the top of this building, and the new building or the renovated building is going to be taller than that crown. And also, the critical root zone is fairly close to the new construction. So any sort of shoring that has to happen will impact the root zones here. And then just a note that these trees are also kind of a source of like limb failures. And this tree, it has some codominant stems, like the main stem is approaching, or the limbs that attach to the main stem are approaching the same size as that main stem. So it's basically kind of a matter of time before that limb drops. And because of that, we kind of see the removal of these trees as a little bit of a benefit. I mean, it's unfortunate to lose this canopy, but our Bureau does kind of have this ficus criteria that we do assess ficus a little more harshly because we have had some major limb failures. And then balancing the loss of a tree that could have a major failure, especially in a bus zone, a busy street like Potrero. We're balancing that approval with the idea that we're going to be getting new trees as part of this development. And since these are street trees, the developer gets credit for existing trees and credit for newly planted trees equally. So we do count the street tree replacement, even when required, as we count them as a replacement because the net number of trees would be the same. Although in this case, we'll be gaining trees because the building has 3 frontages and the other 2 frontages don't have trees. So we'll be gaining trees on each frontage. And so there's the canopy. It grows over the roof. And so the new building is going to eliminate like half the canopy, and then the construction zone in the private property area is within the critical root zone. And so the shoring, so the impact to the roots and the canopy would make this infeasible to retain. And then I guess the inspector also wanted to demonstrate that the second tree is also kind of a ticking time bomb in terms of this limb failure potential. So it has decay in that main union. And so the way broadleaf trees work is they have tension wood, and it's on the top of the limb, or usually if it's on the roots or the main trunk, it'd be on the top of the lean side. So if you can imagine, the top of this limb is pulling tension on that branch to keep the limb on. And so that's tension wood. And essentially this has a wound in that tension wood. So basically, when you have more decay in the wood that helps prevent failure, you basically don't have a mechanism to prevent failure. So this limb is also it's limbed up, so there's not very much canopy in the interior. So it has like a lot of end weight, so it could act like a lever arm. So basically, it would probably be either the Bureau removing this over time eventually, or it having a major limb failure, or allowing it to be removed for construction. And then this third tree, we felt that it could be retained. So we did deny it, and it was not appealed. So that would be required to be protected. And before any release of site permits, the tree protection will have to be installed, and we'll inspect it. And so this tree has more interior canopy. It could be reduced. It can be managed and retained. It has more of a live crown ratio than the other trees. So the live crown ratio is the height of the canopy in proportion to the height of the entire tree. And it has smaller limbs in proportion to the main stem. So it can be reduced and it can be retained in comparison to the other 2 trees. And so it's, as I mentioned earlier, this building is triggering the public works tree planting requirement, and it's Article 16, Section 806D. And so they'll have to replace the other 2 trees, but they're also adding trees. And then in addition to adding trees, they'll be adding landscaping. And so that is a rendering of the building here. So because there's a bus stop here, we generally, our code kind of doesn't allow replacements in bus zones, but we do make exceptions for if the building can take special care to move the placement of the trees and also make it so that the planting area isn't a trip hazard. It's one of the rare occasions that we allow grates. We don't allow grates normally because they often uplift and become a tripping hazard, or they can grow trees. But in this case, with a bus zone where there's going to be a lot of people standing around, walking around, we will allow grates, and we'll just ask that it gets carefully managed. And as the tree gets bigger, the grates can actually be removed because it can fill in more of that planting space. But in this case, so this tree can be shifted back closer towards the curb. You can have a tree within 5 feet of the exit of an intersection. And then because there's trees being planted on 15th and Utah, we're counting that second tree with the X, the one that can't be replaced there because of that streetlight pole and the spacing of the trees. We're counting that as we're saying it's going to be able to be replaced. Either way, because of the frontage of this building, there's 1 tree required for every 20 feet. They won't be able to plant 1 tree for every 20 feet. That's pretty impossible because of the utilities, the spacing of trees. So they'll be paying in lieu fees and or planting and or installing sidewalk landscaping to mitigate. So that concludes our presentation for 151 Potrero.
Thank you. Do we have, is the applicant here that wants to speak on it?
Hello, Ms. Hearing Officer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. My name is John Kevlin. I'm with Reuben Junison Rose here on behalf of the project sponsor. Ms. Nonberry did a really nice job in her staff report, so I'll try to do as little duplicative comment as possible. And I'll make this quick. The tree removal is being proposed as part of the redevelopment of the project of the buildings bounded by Potrero, 15th and Utah Street. In addition to renovation of the existing buildings, the 1-story building at the northeast corner of Potrero and 15th will be demolished and a new 3-story building constructed in its place. We propose the removal of all 3 trees fronting along Potrero. All 3 trees in their basins occupy half the depth of the 8-foot wide sidewalk, which is too large for this sidewalk per city standards. As Ms. Nonberry noted, we are not appealing the denial of the 3rd tree. So we're only here to support staff's decision in the acceptance of removing the 2 trees closest to 15th Street. The trees impact both pedestrian access along this sidewalk as well as muni bus access. The trees are structurally damaged, mostly due to impacts from vehicles on Potrero. And removal of these trees will make the sidewalk safer for users of this building and the surrounding neighbors in the neighborhood. In addition to these justifications, the tree closest to the corner has grown significantly over and above the 1-story building to be demolished and directly conflicts with the 3-story building to be constructed there. The construction also requires 10 feet of excavation. So it's likely to impact the root systems of that adjacent tree. Currently, there are 0 trees along the project's frontage on 15th and Utah Street. And so the project will be installing street trees on these frontages, meaning that the project will still have a significant net increase in the number of street trees despite removal of these 2 trees. We are actually in the process with SDAT, the various relevant agencies, BUF, SFMTA, planning, et cetera, working through how many street trees we can actually fit on this site. And as Ms. Nonberry noted, there's a number of conflicts and all that, but we will be putting as many trees as we can in on this site on all 3 frontages, and we will result in a net increase of trees. So with that, we thank you for your consideration. And myself, I'm here, and we've got other members of the project team, including our arborist here, in case the hearing officer has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So we have two people with their hands raised. We have Aaron and Josh. So go ahead, Aaron.
Hi, this is Erin Wong with Tree Management Experts. I'm the project arborist for this project. I won't go over what Susan Nauberry already said, but I'd add that there's a lot of recent concrete work around the trees, which indicates that there was likely root pruning done on these trees. We didn't do a root collar excavation, but it's possible that large roots were cut, which would further destabilize the trees. And also that there's evidence of past tear outs and, like John said, vehicle hits likely from the Muni buses hitting them. I don't have anything more to add, but I can respond to any questions about the trees. Thanks.
Thank you. Josh, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, Cerise, I was actually wondering if I could share my screen. If that's possible.
I don't know. Charisse, you have 2 minutes though. Charisse, okay. Can he share his screen? You could just, Charisse, is it possible for him to share his screen, or he could just go ahead and send in what he, or send it to you, put it in the chat? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So the first point I'd like to make is that new trees are not new trees. They should have been there to begin with. And this is really just getting new trees at this location is not a bonus. It's literally the worst you can do and still comply with the law. We're basically talking about the last trees left on this block. This is a view of Potrero looking north toward the freeway. So this is the last block before you run into the freeway and a massive urban heat island. In 2016, every other tree on this block was taken out, and I'd like to take you on a very brief tour of just the rest of this block. There's this empty basin, this empty basin, number 2, number 3, number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 empty basins on a single block, the same block that we're now proposing to take out the last of the 2 of the 3 trees and maybe replace what the law requires, although it sounds like not even that much. Finally, looking back from the freeway toward the location, this is what we're looking at. That's the scene. This is what we're doing to our canopy at a time that we can't afford it. It is absolutely shameful that these basins have sat here empty for 5 years. And now we're talking about removing even more trees, perhaps replacing some of them at some point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Kent. And Susanna, I have a question to follow up with what Mr. Josh just presented. Kent, your hand is raised.
Sorry, hi, can you hear me? Hi, I'm Kent, I'm an architect on the project. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear
we
you.
can
Okay,
hear you.
great, sorry. I'm glad that Josh brought up the neighboring trees and vacant space when we were speaking with the Buff staff about how we should plant the trees. It reminded that we hope that we understand.
Kent, can you speak up? Can you speak up, please?
I think he's cutting out.
Okay, so it's not me. I thought it was me. Okay.
1 second.
We still can't hear you.
Does that help at all? Hello?
It's faint, but we can hear. It's very faint.
I'm terribly sorry about that. Is this any better? Hello?
Maybe you can increase the volume on your speaker.
Hello, does that help?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that audio. I wanted to thank Josh for pointing out the neighboring tree. When we were speaking to the Buff staff, it reminded them that, yes, there was a promise to replace all those trees with and we had also proposed to replace all of our trees. Unfortunately, the utilities under the sidewalk, they said we weren't allowed to replace any of the trees on Potrero. So that's why we're going to Utah on 15th. That's all I had to say.
Okay, thank you. Susan, I just have a question with those empty basins that Mr. Cliff had shown. Are there going to be any trees planted in those basins or no?
There aren't plans to replace them right now, but we'll look into, because Potrero is kind of in a CAL FIRE area and Friends of the River Forest has funding. We'll look into seeing when those can be replaced. Our new fiscal year starting in July, and I think we might be getting some more planting funding. So I will write this down as like a priority planting area, especially because there's a freeway there. And I know that there is a streetlight conduit under Potrero. So although I think in front of the subject building, there may be other utilities, not just the streetlight conduit. But for Buff, we often hand dig and plant on top of the streetlight conduits. We do this very carefully. So I will look and I'll let the inspector know and have him keep this in mind for the future planting in the next fiscal year.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other public comments on this agenda item? Okay, in the absence of other public comments, we'll move into order number 204778, 99X Woodward Street /344 14th Street. This is the to consider the removal of 7 significant trees on a private property with replacement of 10 to 15 street trees. Go ahead, Susan.
Pardon? Yes, so the applicant is removing 7 significant trees. And then we're saying replacement of 10 street trees. But as I mentioned earlier, those are 2 separate kind of phases of the project at 344 14th Street. So we approved the removals and the public has protested. And it's a similar situation to Burnett, where we have trees sitting on the property line and in the footprint of the building. And so the construction will occur in the critical root zone and remove like half the canopy of these trees. And again, these trees are in private property. They're not street trees. And they are significant, meaning they're over 20 feet tall, 15-foot canopy spread, or over 12 inches in diameter. So one of the 3. And so this is a site plan of what is existing. And this is the proposed site plan. So you can see that the buildings go right up to the property line. And that they'll be adding street trees. And so this is one of the acacias that is proposed for removal. Again, it's sitting right on the property line, and acacias are very, very intolerant of root pruning, and they're not decay resistant. So if you were to attempt to shrink the property line and try to retain this tree, you'd probably have to pull back at least 30 or 40 feet from the tree to not have some sort of like root failure. And this is the structure of the tree. It's not the worst acacia, it's not the best acacia, and it is kind of has some fairly tight growing space in this very narrow planting strip. And this is the second acacia, and I'll note that these are pretty large trees with a lot of canopy. And for this reason, we appraised the value of each of these trees because they did assess for higher than the in lieu fee. but they do still have some problematic structure. This one has codominant stems. So it has included bark where those two main larger right and left stems meet. You can kind of see there's it's kind of stripy looking on the trunk. That's reaction wood, and that's what happens when you have included bark. It's kind of reacting to some sort of force and pressure and decay. And so reaction wood is put on by the tree when it's trying to counteract some sort of force or damage. And this is tree 3. It also has some sort of codominant stem structure, but it's at the base. And then the upper canopy has codominant stem structure. But again, the size drives a lot of the value. And then when we do our appraisals, we do deduct for structure. And tree 4. So it's kind of it's another large acacia. And this one has slightly better structure, but it does have some codominant structure in the upper canopy. And the growing space is very limited for all of these trees. And that orange dot, you can see on the right there, you have double stacked high voltage PG&E lines. So there's 2 high voltage lines and then 2 distribution lines stacked below. And so they've been pruning that tree as well. And then this is our appraisal sheet for the 4 acacias. And so each of these acacias, the first one appraised for $5,800, the second appraised for $10,000, the third appraised for $3,500, and the fourth appraised for $4,900. And then the other 3 trees are pear trees, so they just barely meet the significant tree criteria. They did not appraise for higher than the standard in Luffy of $2,193. So we did not assess their value. We have to do the highest amount, and the in Luffy happened to be higher than the appraised value of these pear trees. So we'll be collecting these 4 appraised values for those 4 acacias, and then the standard in Luffy times 3 for each of these pear trees. They're just not in leaf in this picture. They leaf out very late, and part of the reason is because they get fire blight and they're very stressed. I'm sure they're in leaf now. And then again, the project will be required to plant at least 10 to 15 street trees separate from this removal. Again, we don't consider the significant tree to be replaceable. So we assess the fees and the removal separately. Then the project will then be required to do the minimum, as Josh says, street tree planting requirement just for adding building. So if there are no trees here, they would be required to do the 10 or 15 new trees based on our code and pay in lieu fees for every tree they cannot plant. And then we're doing the significant tree removal with appraised values separately. So we're essentially considering this 2 different phases. So that concludes our presentation for 344 14th and 99 Woodward.
Thank you. Do we have the applicant with us? I have Justin. Go ahead, Justin. Justin, you're muted.
Hello?
Yes. Can you speak up so that we can hear you, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can I have share screen, please?
Sharice?
Sure, just
Okay.
one moment. Just one moment.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, Mr. Zucker, you can go ahead and share, and then you will need to unmute yourself, please.
One moment, I'm pulling up the share screen.
Okay. And we did see it fine earlier. It's just that we could not hear you.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let me try to fix sorry for the technical difficulties.
That's okay. You can go ahead and share screen first, maybe, and then unmute.
All right, here we go. The applicant opposes the public appeal of the permit to remove 7 trees located on private property, but due to their size and location are considered significant trees pursuant to the city's urban forestry ordinance. The applicant is the sponsor of a 7-story mixed-use residential building that will contain 60 dwelling units and 5 ground floor commercial spaces. The project proposed received approval from the Planning Commission on July in 2019, and the site permit for the project is currently being promised. As seen in the proposed site plan with the existing trees identified, the project is built to the property lines. The 7 trees to be removed are situated within the property lines and within the proposed footprint of the future building. Due to their location, the 7 trees cannot be preserved and must be removed to allow for construction of the 60-unit housing project. It is not feasible to preserve the 7 trees. As noted by Ms. Nawberry, the trees are located near the property lines, resulting in them having limited growing space and has adversely impacted their structure. As part of the application, applicant anticipates planting 15 new street trees on the street frontages surrounding the property, in excess of double the amount of trees to be removed, and will add to the city's urban canopy while also paying for the in lieu fees as noted. The new street tree species have not yet been determined. However, the species chosen will be selected based on BUFF's recommended species list and BUFF's recommendation, with particular focus on their hardiness to ensure success in the urban environment. The tree planting and landscaping associated with the approved project will create a consistent, attractive streetscape that benefits pedestrians and residents for generations to come while adding to the urban canopy. As such, we support the department's determination and urge you to deny the appeal. That concludes my presentation, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments? Josh, go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this is what I think our third agenda item, third removal for development, just like it's happening all over San Francisco, where we're covering permeable surfaces, taking down hundreds of trees every year, building on top of it, and then planting only the bare minimum, but only when other infrastructure doesn't prevent even that from happening. As far as replanting goes, just a reminder that those trees I just showed you were removed in 2016. So there's no rush, apparently, even when we know it's right next to a freeway, just like this development, which is also right next to a freeway. As far as planting money goes, the reality is it's never going to be as low as it's going to be next year. We have a 2014 urban forest plan that called for 50,000 new street trees by 2034. And since then, we've actually lost trees. So trees have never been a budgetary priority, and they're not going to be next year. This particular area has a 2% canopy, 2%. 2%. So for context, San Francisco has the smallest urban canopy compared to LA, which has 20%, New York, which has 24%. So here we are in a declared climate emergency, talking about removing big trees right next to a freeway in a neighborhood that is a 2% canopy. I would just respectfully suggest that trees deserve even a modicum of consideration when it comes to preservation, and where that absolutely cannot be done, should be doing a lot more than just talking about the bare minimum of what the law requires. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments on this item? In the absence of more public, any other public comments, we'll move to the fourth agenda item, which is order number 204-779-966 Delores Street.
So this is to consider removal of 1 street tree with replacement. And we had a service request reported that the base of the tree is rotten. And we have to assess and look at any of these complaints because it's a safety issue. So this is this removal is initiated by the Bureau for safety related reasons. So it's a ficus, and it is a nice large canopy with a large basin. The upper canopy has a little bit of decline. You can see the bare branches there. We've been seeing a little bit of decline in the ficus along Dolores. I think it's because they're a little more mature ficus, and they just happen to have like the natural decline. But there's no secret that the drought, flood, alternating pattern of weather has been stressing a lot of the trees in San Francisco. This tree has a lot of decay at the base, and that kind of sawdust is from us digging out the dead wood. And so that's a closer view of the decay at the base of the tree. So the edges of that wound you can see are kind of ragged. And when you have healthy compartmentalization of decay in trees, that looks smooth, kind of like a ram's horn. That decay does not have that smooth ram's horn reaction wood. So it's continuing to decay, and the tree is not compartmentalizing it. So it's not sealing it off. So trees don't heal, but they seal off wounds, and that's what keeps the wound from spreading. And then they'll have dead wood inside, but they won't necessarily be like structurally unsound. In this case, we don't have that. We have the decay continuing. So that's just a larger picture of what's going on. Basically, the tree also doesn't have any taper or reaction wood on that side either. And so the cavity is about 3 feet deep. It's a little bit of a concern with a tree this large to have decay that extensive. So to us, it indicates that there is decay throughout the roots, and especially when it's that obvious on the outside and then you probe it and it's fairly deep. I suspect that the roots are also in decay, maybe because of that sidewalk repair in the past. You can see the sidewalk flag on the left is fairly new. It's not very recent sidewalk repair, but it's probably over time some sort of root pruning caused a little bit of decay. So for this reason, because of the size of the tree and the decay, and this is a very natural process, unfortunately with urban trees, they have a lifespan that's half that of a tree in a forest. And it's because we're constantly balancing safety, tripping hazards. Like this tree has a 9 foot by 9 foot basin. So that's larger than most trees in San Francisco. So we did make attempts to try to save this tree, but over time, some trees just get decay, and especially ficus. They're not super decay prone, but we find that 5 or 6 years later, they do get some sort of root decay. And because ficus tend to grow larger, the decay balance with the lever of a large canopy sometimes causes a whole tree failure. So we want to prevent that in this case. And so we approved this tree for removal, and the Bureau will be removing it. And I know this question is going to come up, like what is the replacement plan? And because this isn't in an area that can fall under like a Friends of the Urban Forest CAL FIRE grant, we don't have an immediate replacement plan for this empty basin, but we do document that they're empty. And then we often ask if the property owner is willing to plant a tree and or water it. So we've been planting trees for property owners if they agree to water it. That program's been fairly successful. We've gotten about 20 property owners in the last couple months that say, please give me a tree and I'll water it. So we want to put that out there as well. And so that concludes the presentation for 996 Dolores.
Thank you. Do we have the applicant here? Okay. Any public comments on this agenda item?
Sorry, I misspoke. I meant to say 966 Dolores.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. So we have Josh. Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks. I'll keep it really brief. First of all, it's a relief to be talking about a tree removal that is actually a tree that's unhealthy versus just in the way. Yep, Susan anticipated my question, which was talk about actual replacement. And I think she answered that. And the answer seems to be that it'll most likely happen whenever a regular citizen steps up and volunteers to take care of it, which is pretty disappointing. But I thank her for answering that question honestly and in anticipation, as she knows what I am most concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Do we have any other public comments on this agenda item? So in the absence of any, we're going to move to the fifth one, which is order number 204780. Susan?
Yeah, so this is to consider the removal of one significant tree on private property without replacement. So unlike the previous two cases of significant trees. So this is a Pittosporum Brisbane box, and it's in private property, and it meets the significant tree criteria in multiple ways. It has a 13-inch diameter and a 15-foot canopy spread. It is in the footprint of a proposed driveway. So they could reroute the driveway to the left or to the right. And on the left side, you have a street tree that I think is in better condition, healthier than the significant tree. The significant tree is fairly thin. Unfortunately, in this neighborhood, there's a very trendy way to manage the canopy, but it's very thin on the inside and very rounded on top. Because as the Bureau had more of a presence over time, we have been sending letters saying, please don't topiary, please don't round over, please follow standard pruning practices. But because most of the city has been maintaining their own trees, and because the science of arboriculture is ever evolving, people do this sort of aesthetic pruning. So I consider the tree on the left to be healthier than the tree on the right. And essentially our staff approved this tree for removal for the installation of a driveway. And the installation of a driveway does trigger a tree requirement. And again, as I mentioned earlier, a street tree existing is the same credit as a street tree planted. So they'll receive credit for the tree on the left. But separate from that, we will appraise the value of the loss of that significant tree. And as you can see, my colleague kindly wrote on this slide that she appraised it for $2,700. And that is due to like 13-inch diameter drives the base cost, and then there's deductions for the canopy. It's a fairly thin canopy. Again, I caution all people not to manage their trees in this way, but it's not the worst looking tree in the city. It's not brutally topped, but it is very thin, and this does kind of shorten the lifespan over time. Again, and there's another picture of that tree. And so, you know, my colleague deducted points for this tree being thinner than others, than most trees of this species. And so it appraised for $2,700. Our standard and lieu fee is $21.93, and this appraised for just over that. She also assessed she also reduced the value based on this wound here. And so any sort of like wounds on the structure of the tree, anything sort of like decay will deduct in value. So this tree has a wound in this trunk and a wound on top of the tension wood. And as I mentioned earlier, that when you have decay in the tension wood, that's the wood that pulls tension on the limb that keeps it attached to the tree, and it has decay, so it could limb fail. And the tree has slightly less taper. So this is just an explanation of why it appraised for less, not necessarily why we approved it. If someone wanted to just remove this tree for no driveway, we would say hold on to the tree for longer. But in this case, it's in the footprint of a driveway, and it's a private tree for private development. And that concludes our presentation for 1909 Broderick.
Thank you. Is the applicant here? Nicholas, Mr. Lee? Go ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Lee. You're muted. Hello, Mr. Lee?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Is it possible to share my screen?
Sure, just one moment.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, Mr. Lee, you should be able to go ahead and share your screen and then unmute yourself again, please.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sharing the screen. Let's see. Are you still able to hear me and can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
We can see your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to give a brief description of the project and kind of why, we're proposing the driveway, which requires the removal of the tree. This is basically, it's a relatively modest house. Currently it's a 1-bedroom home. So we want to add some square footage to the home and then also add a garage space within the existing footprint of the house. And that garage is going to require the driveway, which requires the removal of the tree. All of the proposed project for the additional square footage of the house is under the house and also towards the rear. So part of the reason of having the driveway in the front and where our addition is really to maintain the existing facade of the house, from the street side. So we're not going to impact the Italianate facade and change that from the frontage. So, as already mentioned, the overall health of the tree is not in, I guess, the best condition. And really the reason for the driveway in this location is because it will fit under the existing house. And so in terms of a planning approval process with the city, this was more favorable for the overall fabric of the neighborhood. This is some of the detail about the health and assessment of the tree. And I think the other part of this is, is removing this tree is going to, well, the current tree does block the visibility of the house. So with the driveway added, we'll remove this tree and really open up the facade of the house just from a streetscape standpoint. We'll be able to see this really lovely home. And, here you can see on the right, this is what you'll see with the tree removed. And here we have the tree, the existing tree on top, and the image on top. So this is kind of the before, and then below this is the proposed with the tree removed. So we will do our best to protect the tree, the existing street tree. And with this existing tree removed, it will open up the facade of this house. And we'll also make sure that, there's additional landscaping that will be planted, along, the sides of that driveway. So there will be some landscaping vegetation.
30 seconds remaining.
Okay, so I think the overall project really requires that this tree is removed to give an upgrade and more space to this modest home, and also will open up the facade of the property so that we can see this really lovely home. So we ask for your support in removing this tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments on this? Okay, I don't see anyone's hand raised. Oh, Josh, go ahead, Josh.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I heard the applicant say something toward the end there of doing our best to protect the existing tree, and it sounded like the department's presentation made that sound like a certainty. So I am curious if that's actually happening, and if so, if the applicant would be willing to put up a bond to make sure that that existing tree remains healthy and safe. I also like to point out that since 2019, when we started tracking this, more than a quarter of trees removed in San Francisco are for infrastructure like garages. And it is astonishing to me that in 2021, when we're now only 8 years away from irreversible climate change, we're still taking out trees so we can shelter our combustible engines. Every time you add a garage or a driveway, research shows that you encourage private automobile trips. And in San Francisco, that travel is nearly half of all of our pollution. And while our Department of the Environment is desperately trying to reduce private travel, our planning department and Department of Public Works appear to be enabling it. So I'm not making this objection because I think I can actually stop this particular project from happening, but I'm making it because I want to make a record of the fact of what our city is doing to itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? In the absence of any, we'll move on to the last item on the agenda. Which is order number 204-781-166 Wallace Avenue. Thank you, Susan.
So this is to consider the removal of one, I'm sorry, that should say significant tree, and I apologize for that. This is another significant tree. And it's with replacement, but pending utilities in the sidewalk adjacent to the property at 1666 Wallace Avenue. And so that's a significant tree. It has fairly poor structure. So basically that the middle of the leader has been lost a long time ago. And you can see right underneath the green canopy, there's a bunch of decay. They're in that Monterey cypress. Also, I'd like to know Monterey cypress are usually huge. Like they can grow up to hundreds of feet tall. So this tree has been constrained by the very small growing space. And so there is decay there in the main stem, and it doesn't have very good reaction wood. And it also probably has had some roots cut in order to preserve that driveway as well. And so that is there's the loss of that main stem, that limb has been lost. And so the canopy, the decay goes from that cut all the way down to the base. And then on the right side of that tree, it doesn't flare out. So that's what we call reaction wood or compression wood also at the base of the tree. And when you don't see trunk taper, that is a concern that the tree is not putting on good roots. It's also in a raised basin there. And then it has excessive amounts of decay in all of the limb attachments as well. So those limbs are very poorly attached. And there's more pictures of the decay in the upper canopy. And there has so that's all dead wood there from the decay. And it has reached the base of the tree in that very tiny growing space. So our inspector approved the removal of this tree. And we're doing a little more digging. It looks like our code allows and or requires a replacement because it says section 810A, the removal of a significant tree shall follow section 806B of the planting and removal by people other than department, and it outlines replacement. So there is room, it looks like there's room for a replacement tree in the sidewalk. Our inspector would have to USA do an underground service alert to make sure there's no utilities there, but it looks like it can be replaced in the sidewalk. And I know a lot of property owners are averse to having like a sidewalk tree, and this removal of a significant tree, the tree can't be replaced as a significant tree. There isn't quite enough growing space, but we'll look deeper into our code and check to see if that significant tree can and should be replaced as a sidewalk tree. And our department would basically take on the maintenance of that street tree once it's established. So it's about 3 to 4 years. So unlike a significant tree where the property owner is on the hook for the life of the tree, with a street tree, the property owner is not responsible. And there are high voltage lines there. So we'd recommend that the tree be a medium to small stature because PG&E essentially does not want us planting large trees under their high voltage lines. So based on the amount of decay reaching the base of that tree from the upper wounds here and the limited growing space and the senescence of that tree, the Bureau approved the removal of this tree. And we believe that there's a replacement location available in the sidewalk. And this concludes the Bureau's presentation at 1666 Wallace.
Thank you, Susan. Do we have the applicant on this? Annie? Go ahead.
Hi, yes, I'm the applicant. I just want to say thank you for presenting your findings. Our concern is that the tree will fall on pedestrians due to the condition that it's in. So I just want to say thank you for your consideration in the removal of this tree.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this? Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. So having been to, I don't know, a couple hundred of these hearings at this point, I don't believe that a fear of a tree falling is a reason to remove it. But if it is a unhealthy tree that the Bureau has reason to believe is going to fail or has failed in the past, which I don't know if I heard that or not, but maybe Susan did say that, then that of course would be the Bureau's prerogative. I would also point out that it is a net loss here. We're talking about taking out a Monterey cypress, which has a high rate of carbon sequestration and also ecological support for our native species that we're putting in some small statured street tree. We're going to be losing, it's a net loss to the environment, which maybe seems not a big deal for one tree. But then when you add together all of the trees that we've been talking about today, including several Monterey cypress earlier in this hearing, we're just racking up the losses. And then I just, one final note is that it does seem to me that by the time we come to a hearing, we should know whether or not a tree would be replaced, and it would be a service to the public to make sure that we know what we're objecting to or what we're talking about by having that information by the time we get to a hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments on this agenda item? Any other public comments? Because we're about to close today's hearing. In the absence of any other public comments, this hearing is now closed. We want to thank you for your time and for your comments, and you'll be notified once the decisions have been made. Thank you and have a good day.